everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We're here to talk today about FAA rules regarding BVLOS operations and some real world applications. So I'm Javier Caina, Director of Policy and Aviation Regulation, and with me is Michael. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, how you guys doing? Thank you so much for joining in today's webinar. I'm Michael Lee. I'm a Solutions Engineer at DJI. Today, I'm excited to kind of talk to you guys about some of the real world applications in the Beyond Visual Line of Sight waiver and also some settings to set you up for success in Flight Hub 2 for your waiver.
Awesome. So let's start. Okay, so today we are going to go through these topics. First of all, we're going to talk about the regulatory landscape in the US. We are going to describe, in general terms, some waiver types that you can use when you intend to fly BVLOS, so beyond visual line of sight. We're going to review templates that we, DJI, have prepared for you to get familiarized and make the whole process easy to understand and to apply. Also, we're going to review the submission process, the actual process where you go directly to the FAA drone zone and submit your application. You will see that very quickly and the references to it. And by the end, we're going to cover with Michael the real world applications based on this type of waivers. And finally, we're going to review some additional resources that we consider are really practical for you in the moment when you, after this webinar, get familiarized, then you can go directly to these resources to have some information at hand at any moment. So throughout this presentation, you will find some questions, very easy questions. And we invite you to participate there will be polls in the GoToWebinar. So we invite you to participate because we are going to randomly select 4 people at the end to get some swag and DJI swag, and then share the results and discuss and continue the learning process throughout the webinar with those questions. So first of all, the BVLOS waiver types section. So first of all, let's start with some context. Right now, as of today, if you want to fly for commercial purposes in the US, you have to follow Part 107 regulations, which only allow for visual line of sight. That's Section 31 of Part 107. So that means that if, as the current regulatory framework only allows for visual line of sight, if you want to go BVLOS, you need to get a waiver. So a waiver is essentially an authorization from the FAA to waive parts of this regulation 107. To get that BVLOS waiver in particular, the one that we're interested here, is the operator. First important point that is not someone else for you, is the operator who's going to use the system, the one who has to submit the application and a safety case to the FAA. So you need to prove that your operation is safe. So we are going to go through this process and you will get familiarized on how you tackle and how you face this kind of safety cases. So as of today, the FAA is preparing a BVLOS new rule. Is actually in a rulemaking process based on the mandate from Congress for what is it called as Part 108. That's expected to be the BVLOS rule set up. But in the near term, until that rule is in place, the waiver process will continue. So the draft of the rule, what's called the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, is expected to be published this year or maybe early next year. But after publication of that draft rule, it's going to take about a year and a half or 2 years to have an effective rule, a rule in place, because after the draft, there's a comment period. Then the FAA will publish the final rule, and probably there's going to be some time to make that rule effective. So until then, nothing will change, and all what we are going to discuss in this webinar is valid. You do need BVLOS waiver until that final rule is published and effective. So let's start with some general considerations on these kind of waivers. So there are some basic requirements that you need to keep in mind, kind of a philosophy behind this kind of operations. So when you're operating BVLOS, the pilot is not right beside the actual drone. So the pre-flight checks need to be achieved by the remote pilot, but clearly remotely. So that means that you need to do anything that the system has to do. So the pre-flight checklist that is already included in this case in FlightHawk 2, but we have already achieved this using our baseline configuration, meaning FlightHawk 2 and the DJI Dock. So you don't need to add any additional cameras, any additional infrastructure. With the current configuration that we are describing here, FlightHawk 2, Dock, you're already compliant to do this kind of pre-flight checks. So in summary, recapping, you don't need additional cameras or additional software or something else. With this configuration, you can start. So this is a first general consideration, pre-flight checks. Second consideration is you need to take into account the air risk during your BVLOS operations. Clearly, for day and night operations, you need to utilize anti-collision light. Essentially, what you're saying is being conspicuous to other aircraft. And by default, these waivers are for uncontrolled airspace, what we call Class G, and in general, more or less not close to airports. Nevertheless, if you want to apply later or you need an operation in a controlled airspace, you can certainly build on top of these configurations and request airspace authorizations a part of this waiver approval. So this is a second consideration, air risk always, that you need to keep in mind when flying BVLOS. Third aspect that you definitely need to take into account is ground risk. So for ground risk in the US, there is already in place an operations over people rule. So you need to follow this kind of regulation. So there are two ways to face this risk. And one is, in this kind of BVLOS operations, you can consider having a control access site on the ground, meaning that you're operating your drone in an area where you have a fence around or some sort of security or expectation of private property, some areas that are really very low populated, and in general, avoiding flying over people. So over people that is not aware of the operation. That's what we are talking about. So if you apply for a specific site that has some special considerations and you cannot do this kind of access site, all these deviations from the baseline that we are describing, you definitely need to substantiate this in way more detail and ideally show photos, pictures, whatever evidence to show FAA where are you planning to operate. So one consideration for ground risk is considering a controlled access site. But there is another path, And now we are talking specifically about Dock, DJI Dock 2. So for operations over people, there's already one FAA approved parachute that you can definitely use in this system, which is an ABSS parachute recovery system, PRS, that is allowed for category 2 and 3 operations. That's another path that you have. So if you fly DJI Dock 2, so the M3D series, using this parachute, then you're already complying with the operations over people rule from part 107. So keeping in mind those three considerations, pre-flight checks, air risk, and ground risk in general as a philosophy of when you're going to operate BVLOS. Now let's talk about some waiver types that are typically useful for this kind of operations. So the one that we are going to mention is using a visual observer on site. That's in general is you have someone that can, on the operational area that can observe a drone and the surroundings and can communicate with the pilot. There's another type that is the shielded concept. So essentially, if the drone is flying at a certain distance, like a shield, which can be infrastructure or it could be natural obstacles. And a third type, which is detect and avoid systems, using additional systems that can detect the airspace intruders in the airspace, other airspace users, and give situational awareness to the pilot. So we are going to dive into these three types of waivers as typical routes on to face BVLOS operations. So let's start with the first one. So if you have people in your operational area and like a security guard or anyone else, you can use them as visual observers. So these people, they don't need to be Part 107 certified. So they don't require a license. So if typically in a construction site or a mining site, you can certainly use personnel that is in the operation and be in close contact with the pilot. So this is very practical for shorter weekly flights. And as I mentioned, this kind of construction mining sites are a typical example. We will go later on with real applications. Michael is going to talk a bit more about this. So, but this is the general concept. And this is a good option if you don't have shielding. We were mentioning the next slide. If you don't have shielding available, or simply if you need or want to fly higher, these waivers are typically up to 400 feet. One key requirement with visual observers is that there has to be a communication at all times between the visual observer and the pilot. So the second waiver type is the shielding concept, which essentially is using the shield as infrastructure on the ground. So this could be artificial, like buildings or something, or natural obstacles. So this one is essentially, you can see the shielding concept like a first step that the FAA tried to open up for the industry, for the community, so that we can all get experience of flying BVLOS. The goal ultimately is once the final rule Part 108 is in place, it's expected that these are more routine operations. For the moment, this is a conservative approach, but is a step by FAA to open up the operations and get some experience. So typically these shielded operations are granted for 50 feet, like a 50 feet layer, meaning that it's 50 feet around obstacles on top and on the sides, and from the ground as well. So the drone throughout the whole operation has to fly within that boundary. So typically this is the the most common approved waiver for the based on the shielding concept for 50 feet. 50 feet could be a bit restrictive. We are aware of that, but definitely if you have some specific features or special characteristics in your operation, like taller objects, or you have some geography special, you can definitely apply for a bigger, like an extended threshold, more than those 50 feet. But you need to substantiate properly and in detail all your operation. The ultimate goal here is to show FAA that your operation is safe. So 50 feet is intrinsically considered safe, as other aircraft are not going to enter to fly that low. But if you need more, we have seen actual real cases where people, customers, have applied and have gotten increased boundaries up to, I mean, 75, 100, or even 200 feet. So it's not impossible to get it, but the higher the threshold, the stronger the substantiation, the more detailed substantiation that you have to include in your application. And the third type of waiver that you can use, certainly for BVLOS operations, is using detect and avoid equipment. This is typically systems on the ground that are used for airspace detection, such as radars or visual cameras, and is essentially giving situational awareness to the pilot on the surroundings of the operation, of the operational area. So if, as an example, if a plane or drone is detected in the radar, the pilot will be able to see that intruder and act upon, like command whatever is needed, send or whatever. So a lot of data and research is required to show that the detection capability is enough and that the performance of the system is good enough. So there are some examples on the market that you can definitely browse and see what fits your specific operation. For the moment, the key message here is this is a third path that you could consider. Obviously, you need to consider as well the cost that this equipment implies on your operation. So we will see that having the three paths is what is the best option for you to choose upon the correct, based on the characteristics of your specific mission. Okay, so here we go. We go with the first review question. So we are going to open the poll for a moment, and we invite you to answer this easy question. Does the visual observer need to have a Part 107 certificate? Please vote yes and no. We will see here. Let's see. Open up. It's not. Okay, yeah, here it goes. Okay, so nice. Okay, 94% saying no. Perfect. This is a key message. So if you will use Part 1 visual observer in your operation, he or she doesn't need to be Part 107 certificated. So this is the practical use when you're having people on the place where you're operating. So next question. Do I need to get a new waiver for each BVLOS flight using DJI Docks? or no? Okay, we'll give a couple seconds more. Excellent. So 75% people are saying no, you don't need to get a new waiver for each BVLOS flight. So that's true. Just to be clear, every time that you're going to fly in BVLOS, you don't need to get a new waiver. So you don't need to start a new process. But every time that you're flying, you do need to have a waiver in place, a current waiver. So typically these FAA waivers are issued for months or years, depending on what you have requested, but it could be up to 3 years. So during the validity period of that waiver, you can use and you can fly your system with the same waiver. So it has to be current, that waiver, but you don't need to get a new waiver every time that you're flying. And by the way, these waivers are issued to the applicant, to the operator. So this is not attached to one specific mission, to one specific um, company. It's just the applicant. It's the applicant, the operator, the one who's getting it, and can fly with the declared configuration for using this waiver. This is not attached to serial numbers. Is if you have a DJI Dock, so you can have several and use different, but it's the model what you're using that has been declared as part of that waiver. Okay, so let's jump now to templates. So first of all, what has been approved? So DJI, we applied as operators as well. We are manufacturers, but in this case, we applied as operators as well for a baseline configuration using Flight Hub 2 for the remote pilot, DJI Docks 1 and 2, this is valid for both, and that's it. And well, obviously the corresponding drone. So Matriz and M30 Dock version for Dock 1 or M3D series for Dock 2. So what we have gotten is two waivers, one for visual observers on site and another one for standard shielding, so the 50 feet that we mentioned before. If you go to the FAA webpage, the Part 107 waivers issued page, and you type DJI, you will find the certificate of waivers. So these waivers are nationwide, so they are not specifically linked to one specific site. They're nationwide, as long as the conditions of what you have declared are the same to where you're going to operate. They are nationwide, is for uncontrolled airspace, day and night operations, and remote pre-flight checks, as we mentioned before. This is what we are calling the baseline configuration. But you can build on top of these configurations and use, for instance, detect and avoid hardware if you want to use it, or third-party software. Any deviation from what we have already gotten approved is definitely a path that you can use, but you need to detail and explain in your application a bit more on these additions to this baseline configuration. So we're going to go very quickly through the template here just to have an overview. But first of all, we want to remind you that please read and review all the contents of this template. Check for the consistency of the contents of this template to your specific operation, and fill all the places where we are marking in the template. There are just few places where you need to add something. We will see that in a moment. Okay, I think we can go straight to showing the template. So this is how the template would look like. Is just a document where we have marked essentially where you need to do something like the application date, you need to update it, you need to check that you have all the documents, the supporting documents. We are providing that, of course, is typically these user manuals. And the type of information that you need to add is simply your company name here and there, and especially one description of the operation that you're going to do. This is for the standard shielding. So in principle, if your operation is okay with 50 feet, you don't need to add more information. This is already described here. And this, what you're seeing here, this document is the waiver safety explanation, which is the core document of your application. So here you will find the description of the system, the aircraft, the dock, flight hop 2. For instance, if you're using third-party software, you need to modify this section, for instance. Some safety features, containment features, detect and avoid in terms of obstacle avoidance and ADS-B in, lights, return to home, latency, remote ID, pre-flight checks. So this document is already describing all the system, security aspects, reliability. Then it comes with another section in terms of pilot and personal details. Here you need to explain and confirm that this is what you're going to use in your company. Then it comes the actual safety case. So here is where we have done already all the analysis, the safety analysis of all the risks of these kind of operations. We are displaying the shielding concept for 50 feet. So this is already done. You need to modify anything of the contents in this document. But again, you need to read through all of this and check for consistency, simply that is matching really 100% your operation. And finally, there are some guiding questions that FAA requires for when you are applying. So it's a set of questions, very detailed from FAA, that you need to reply. This is already the content we have provided. And all this document that you see here is what we have used to get approved for using DJI Docks. So you can be confident that if your operation is fitting into this kind of parameters, 50 feet, shooting concept, you can certainly use it and apply with it. Okay, so this is essentially how the templates look like. Okay, next question. DJI Dock's approved waivers, we are talking about visual observers and standard shielding, are valid for only one specific location, or are valid, the location that you describe in your document, or they are valid nationwide? Let's go ahead and submit your answers. We will give some seconds for this. Okay. This one is interesting. And I like that I made the remark on what you have described in the document. Okay, we have 2/3 saying is nationwide, 1/3 of the people saying is specific to the location that you have described. Okay, this might be a tricky question. So, but what we have specifically asked is on the DJI's Dock's approved waivers, so what we already have gotten. So our waivers are valid nationwide. So you can, as long as you comply with the same characteristics and controller space, control access site, for instance, all the mitigations exactly the same. This is not linked or attached to one specific location. You can fly anywhere in the country, whenever those conditions are met. Now, if the caveat here is if you're going for something more than the baseline, more than 50 feet, higher thresholds, and which increase the risks, so probably you could get approved only for one specific location. But in general, these waivers that have been approved for DJI are nationwide. So you can feel confident that by using these templates in the same under the same conditions for operations, you can apply and look for aim for nationwide operations. Okay, so finally, what we have discussed in general is some principles of BVLOS operations, some the templates that we have gotten. Let's now recap and put all this in context on the real case that you're going to submit. So in order to apply for BVLOS operations, first of all, please have a look at this link. We highly recommend that you get familiarized with instructions from FAA regarding Part 107 waivers. Of course, most of the content on where to start is precisely the content of this webinar, but nevertheless, please have a look to these official guidelines from FAA. So what you need to do is going online to the FAA drone zone, and you must submit the application with the main document, which is the template we have shown, which is called the Waiver Safety Explanation, plus some supporting documents, which are the user manuals that were listed within the template. So you need to have those documents at hand and go to the FAA drone zone to apply for a Part 107 waiver. So as we saw in the template, essentially what you're submitting is a waiver safety explanation containing the operation detail, the system details, the personnel, risk assessment, and guiding questions. That's where all those aspects, you're already including them into the document, the template, the waiver safety explanation. And you have to add the supporting documents, which are these user manuals listed here. And you will see at the end the links for where you can find this reference. All this is available to you right now for using to be ready to apply. So once you have ready those documents, you go to the FAA drone zone, you log in, and you will request and you start an application for an operational waiver, which is what we are aiming to get here. And typically you're going to apply for, typically for BVLOS, you need to apply for waiving Part 31, which is the visual line of sight rule, and also Part 33, which is the visual observer part, if you need to apply for visual observer. One important point is please do not forget to attach the supporting documents. There is a button by the end of the application that's called add attachment, and that's the only chance you have to add the supporting documents. Actually, all the documents, because the waiver safety explanation is another PDF, for instance. So these are the general steps that you need to do. Having your documents ready, go to the online portal, the FAA Drone Zone, and upload your documents. Essentially, that's all what you need to do. But also in the resources at the end, you will find a tutorial on how to navigate this form. So here we just depict the highlights, but you will see a tutorial also available for you to just double check the different clicks and options that you need to do while when filling this form. So in summary, again, first of all, the whole process is review requirements and determine the appropriate waiver. So you need to understand your operation and consider, do I need a visual observer waiver or a shielding, or do I need to use detect and avoid? Then review the templates and use it directly or as an aid or a reference for your specific case. These templates are available for, we have a template for visual observers, a template for shielding operations, and even one if you're using parachutes. So you can also choose the template according to what you need to apply to. Then you need to submit the waiver application to the FAA with the supporting documents, what we mentioned before on the FAA drone zone, and done. When you're done on your side, then you need to typically wait for 90 days. This is the typical turnaround process from FAA to review and response and get response. So sometimes during that period, you might get some requests for further information from FAA. So you just need to reply and give whatever is needed. Sometimes you don't need to add any additional information. And also, just to know, to let know that this process, we got approved, and we have already shared these kind of templates with several customers, and customers have already applied using these templates, and they have been already approved by FAA. So this is a proven process. We are open this process even more for all of you to use it and get familiarized and demystify the whole process. But this is already something real and that has been getting acceptance using all the process we have described. So finally, the last review question. So let's go for the poll. When applying to a BVLOS waiver using DJI Docks, the waiver safety explanation based on DJI's template is the only document I need to submit to FAA Drone Zone. So the waiver safety explanation, the template, the long template with operational aspects, with all this description, that's all I need to submit. Is this true or false? Please submit your responses, and we will get some seconds. Yes. Okay. I think this is based on the answers. The message was clear apparently. This. More than 80% of the people say false, and that is the correct answer. The waiver safety explanation is the core document. It has all the meat inside: safety assessment, operational description, your system, all what you need to really describe what you're planning to do. Yes, but that's when, in the moment of submission, that's not the only document you need to submit. You need to submit this plus the supporting documents that were described in this presentation, essentially user manuals. So finally, these are the some bonus resources. You will find here, we focus this presentation on the US just to get more clarity and familiarization on the US process for when you're applying for BVLOS. But you can find also some other resources related to Europe and a blog also for regulations in the US. So please have a look to these blogs and these videos, also recapping on all the concepts we have done, and also fill in this survey to receive some supporting materials and templates. You will see this at the very end of the presentation. And with this, I will pass it over to Michael. I think we covered the first part. So Michael, the floor is yours.
Does my screen look good? Alrighty, good to go. All right. Yeah, so Javier kind of went into some of the technical side of things of the waiver and how it works. I'll be kind of going over some of the real world applications. So kind of breaking down some of those waivers that he talked about, like a review, high level. You have your first one, your visual observer on site. The first the first waiver option involves having a designated visual observer on the operational site observing the surrounding airspace. That VO on site allows for beyond visual line of sight operations with the trained VO maintaining visual contact of the drone and its surrounding area during the operation while keeping a constant communication with the pilot. This enables extended range and enhanced safety. The key distinction of this waiver is that Javier kind of talked about is that the VO does not need to hold a Part 107 certificate and does not need to have a remote controller. So operations can be conducted up to 400 feet even without shielding, so that's a huge bonus. This waiver is ideal for scenarios requiring shorter drone operations where you have personnel on site, such as like a construction project where a site security can assist. Also, that higher altitude allowance helps speed up processes like mapping that requires overlapping photos. So some of the benefits of having a dock with a visual observer is that you don't need a certified pilot on every site since the VO doesn't need to have the 107 certificate. Time savings due to not having to drive to each site as one pilot can manage different docks or sites. And the whole process is automated from mission planning to data collection and upload and streamlining your drone operations. So we have worked with some companies like Syngenta to utilize this waiver to research agriculture plots, moving flight planning off-site, and automated data upload and battery charging. I'll kind of discuss some of these use cases in the next few slides. Into the second waiver review, you have your shielded standard and shielded. This waiver option it permits beyond visual line of sight drone flights without a visual observer present. The concept of shielding refers to a physical structure that will serve as a shield for the drone operation, thus mitigating the airspace risks. So to achieve this, the drone needs to fly within a certain distance from the shield to ensure that operational safety. That being said, the shield can be infrastructure such as like a building, power lines, towers, or even the ground or any natural obstacles like trees. With these operations, the shielded standard and the shielded, they do need to stay within a hard ceiling up to 400 feet. We have also seen other users utilize the DJI Dock to approve for shielded operations at greater distances, up to 200 feet across a site, enabling additional use cases, including site mapping, panoramas. Additional shielding options are also expected specifically for public safety operations. So overall, your shielded standard and shielded operations are particularly beneficial for use cases like industrial inspections with large facilities, monitoring extensive linear infrastructure like the power lines, or providing security overwatch over areas. These locations usually have options to be used for shielding. And then your last waiver type is the detect and avoid systems. This last waiver option is utilizing a detect and avoid system, the technology such as radars or any visual camera arrays that can be used by the operator to enable that beyond visual line of sight drone operation without having any VO on site or shielding. So this is going to rely on installing sensor technology to cover the operational volume that will allow the operator to detect air traffic, make any evasive action if needed. This does require demonstrating, detect, and avoid system compliance and establishing robust operation procedures. So that's kind of the commercial pathways with some of these. We're going to go into some examples next. So Syngenta, I mentioned a little bit about, is an agriculture company that focuses on assisting farmers. They're currently using the DJI Dock 2 with the VO waiver and VO on site to research agricultural plots. This enables them to take their mission planning offsite, automate any data upload, and battery charging. So they have like typically like an intern on site to keep that visual line of sight with the drone. Another example of using VO on site is the Fort Wayne Police Department. They have a police air support unit that is very active. They have a program known as DFR, which is Drone First Responder, that is pretty popular in public safety currently because it has the ability to provide real-time information to officers during emergencies. This waiver makes sense for them. As you can kind of see right here, this is where they would situate their pilot and visual observer, and then they have their dock right here. And then from there, the drone is deployed and able to arrive on scene quicker and live stream any video. Another use cases with the standard shield is currently right now, this end user being a California oil and gas company is using a standard waiver for mapping gas plants and tank farms, security surveillance, and visual and thermal inspections. The reason they went with this waiver is because of the ease. It was easier to get started using our DJI template. From this, they were able to run inspection routes in the future. They also want to expand to a larger shielding area for mapping. And then another standard shielded is a solar company that focuses on solar projects in the US. Currently are using docks to enable automated drone flights to capture images and videos of solar farms. This data is integrated into an AI engine to identify and classify defects and anomalies. This can streamline your whole entire inspection process as cost savings you can see in the chart ranging from 14 to 17 times the initial investment cost within just 1 year is obtained through the 4 key drivers: recovered revenue, operational cost savings, increased efficiency, and risk mitigation. Another example is a Texas oil and gas company. They have a shielded waiver. They use this waiver for live mission recording, AI spot check to automate inspections. The dock also for them creates 3D models for flight planning and data capture that includes pipeline inspections, well monitoring, and emergency response. So how they were able to get this waiver up to 200 feet was they were able to justify to the FAA that they needed this for shielding distance to be successful in their deployment. So they needed the range and also the mapping. They were able to justify the importance of the assets they were inspecting, such as power lines and other energy resources. So last but not least, the avoid and detect systems. Pearland Police Department has a growing public safety drone program. They're known for their DFR program, which utilizes quick UAS response to emergency situations. They were able to leverage the detect and avoid systems to quickly assess emergency scenes. They have these devices and systems placed tactically around the city to enable this waiver. So I'll go more into some of where these Flight Hub 2 settings are, but just some examples right now we have our continue task after lost link. So if your drone encounters a communication loss, this setting will basically be able to continue the drone and its route and ensure that it follows within your beyond visual line of sight procedures. Also, we have the ability for ADS-B in, which is our air sense monitoring. This is an example right here. We can see any aircraft. So our drones all can read ADS-B in and see if there's any helicopters or any manned aircraft or airplanes in the area so that you can avoid any mishaps. So more settings in Flight Hub 2 would be your aircraft settings, such as your beacon, your max altitude, max distance, battery life, and charging settings. And why this is important is maybe, when you're flying without a waiver or just flying with Part 107 with your drone, maybe some of these aren't such a big concern, but with a waiver, if you have an altitude restriction up to 200 feet, 150 feet, you don't want to be breaking some of these restrictions that you have with your waiver and violating anything against your waiver. Also, you have your geofencing, which in Flight Hub 2, you're able to create your own virtual boundaries for your mission areas, where not to fly, where to fly. This essentially ensures that the drone is compliant with your approved beyond visual line of sight operating area. So this is the same exact resources. We encourage you to fill this survey out to receive any supporting materials, any templates that we have for any beyond visual line of sight waivers that you're interested in. I also have some videos now that I will kind of show mission planning using Flight Hub 2 to ensure that you're within your beyond visual line of sight restrictions. Also some examples of some ADS-B and also some other tips and tricks. Let me go ahead and stop sharing this real quick. So I'm going to show you guys an example on Flight Hub 2. So on Flight Hub 2, I'm in my project. I've named it FAA Waivers Made Easy. I went ahead and processed a LiDAR 3D point cloud in DJI Terra, and I was able to upload that into Flight Hub 2. Once it's uploaded, I'm able to mission plan using this model. So this is an example of some power lines. So I'm going to go ahead. We can pretend that we have a dock set up right now. We go in, we plan a mission, name it. We choose what we want to do. So right now we want to do a waypoint route mission. We want to fly the Matrice 3D series, the 3DT with a thermal. We can go ahead and want to select our takeoff point, which would typically be where our dock is. And then from here, you're able to kind of plan your mission. So if you're ever confused, you can just click the question mark, which is the help button on your keyboard, and it'll populate all the keys that are related to each command. And from here, you can mission plan virtually using Flight Hub 2. So you can see how this can be useful if you have your beyond visual line of sight waiver and you have the task area or the area that you're planning to fly mapped out using our LiDAR camera L2 and uploading that data into Terra, processing it, and then uploading it to Flight Hub 2. So right now I'm planning a mission inspecting some power lines. As you can see, I'm about 150 feet right here, and I'm able to essentially fly to each power line and inspect it, choose my camera angle. Every time I snap a photo, it drops a waypoint. So this can be really, really useful, as you can see in the future when you do have everything set up. You have your beyond visual line of sight, you have your dock, and then you also have your 2D or 3D models, point clouds uploaded to Flight Hub 2 for operations. So you can see I've quickly planned out a mission, and then from here you actually have the ability to select each waypoint, and you can select no return point, which essentially is if I had set it at 3 and I was at 2 and I was going to 3, if a return to home point is initiated, the drone will continue to fly on its path. So if you have any obstacles or any let's say building or something, you can essentially have a safe return to home where the aircraft will continue along its waypoint and follow its route. The next I'm going to show you is geofencing. So you can see how easy it is. I just went into my map task area, and let's say I didn't want to fly over this flow station or this building. I can quickly click and create a circular geo zone where your aircraft will not be able to fly. So you can see this is also important, as when you have a waiver, you're only set to a certain area or where you can fly and where you can't fly. And you can see how these tools enable compliance for your waiver in Flight Hub 2. So for example, now I'm going to show you if I wanted to create a task area where essentially my drone will not be able to fly out of this area. All right, now I have some more videos to show. Another example is playing with your settings. So this is kind of how it looks like when you do have a dock at an oil and gas facility right here. You'd go ahead and click into your settings and you can see your actions. And then from here, you can see your beacons, your max altitude, right? When the aircraft is powered off, you're not able to adjust some of these, but you can ensure to adjust this before your flight. So if you have an altitude or a distance that you're enabled to from your waiver, you can adjust those, and you want to make sure that those are plugged in so that you're not breaking any rules. Another example, I wanted to show the ADS-B, a cool video. So you can see the drone is actually, let me push play. The drone is actually coming in for landing, and you can see this aircraft right here is flying by, and you can get some telemetry information about it. And this can help, with any, if you are flying your waiver near any manned aircraft, you do have that ADS-B reading it. So that kind of concludes my videos I wanted to show you. I want to make sure that I'm sharing the right screen. I can start answering some questions. Let's see. Just want to make sure slideshow. Okay. Oh, no, didn't want to play from start.
Okay, so Michael, I see that there are some questions already in the chat. If you want, I already have a look to some of them. I can start if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. So let's first go through the questions that we got first in the webinar. We also received some previously from people that registered to this webinar. So we picked some of them that are uh, representative. So we'll try to cover as much as we can. So let's start first one. So let me start in order. So the first question I see here is this one. Okay, can you get the BVLOS waiver for spraying drones like the Agras T50? There are fields that I can see the drone at one end, but in order to spray to the other end, I will no longer be able to see it. All operation will be under 50 feet maximum. Max of the shield operation. Okay, so that's a good question. So the materials that we have prepared are only referring to DJI Docks, Dock 1 and Dock 2. And with the configuration that we said, Flight Hub 2 and the drones depending on Dock 1 or Dock 2. So the practical answer is no, these templates are not exactly for other drones. Nevertheless, the overall process that we have described is valid for any BVLOS operation. So if you want to apply for this kind of operations using Agras T50, keeping no height, being not higher than 50 feet, you can apply for that one. I mean, it sounds like very safe operation. Agricultural operations in general safe because of that precise reason, that is really low level flight. So definitely you can follow the same approach using the same kind of structure for applying, describing the system, the operational details, the risk assessment, but you have to redo the risk assessment, prepare the risk assessment for your specific operation. So all these considerations, air risk, ground risk, pre-flight checks, all what we have covered here is valid in general for BVLOS applications, waiver applications, but the materials that we have provided are only for DJI Docks. Thank you for that question. Let me look for the next one so that I don't miss anyone. Does the BVLOS regulations differences in between date and night operations? What additional equipment is needed for night flight, if any? Thank you for that question. So what we have gotten approved with our waivers, which is essentially the templates that we have described, are valid for both day and night operations without adding anything else. So essentially, the content of the waiver safety explanation, what we have there is what we use to get approval. So it covers, you don't need anything additional, and you can operate at night without any problem. Next question. I see that we already replied to several logistics questions. Let's see. Do we have templates geared towards Canadian regulations? So at the moment, no, but we have been in close contact with Transport Canada, and we have been provided some information to facilitate. In general, the process is the SFOC process, um, the Special Flight Operational Certificate, which is kind of the equivalent to the US waivers. They also have some standard scenarios that you can consider depending on the operation. So you can we you can expect in the near future some more materials regarding this. But this one in particular is not for Canada; it's US based. But we have been in close conversations with Transport Canada about this. Next question. How do you account for ground risk? I think we covered this in the webinar. If you go back to the slides when you see the recording, there's one section at the beginning, air risk and ground risk, and we were considering ground risk with control access site. So you're controlling who's accessing the operational area. Essentially, it should be only people aware of the operation. Or you can use a parachute to mitigate the ground risk and the risk over people, and by using a parachute that is compliant with the operations over people. So you can go back to the material and check it, but that's essentially the answer. Okay, next one. How do you apply for BVLOS in the UK? We will release more materials later. This one was specifically focused on the US. Okay, we're receiving more questions now. Let's see. Okay, for the European market, please have a look at the contents that are displayed on the bonus resources. Let's see, I saw something else. Are your templates only for Class G airspace? The answer is yes. This is what we call the baseline configuration. But as we mentioned, you can build on top of that. So if you want to apply for control airspace, you can certainly use our template and add whatever you need to describe more. But typically, you need to get first the waiver and then, or in parallel, get the authorizations for control airspace. So meaning this doesn't preclude flights in controller space, but you need to make sure to get the corresponding permits for where you're going to operate. Okay, we are going to talk about DFR in a moment. On public safety, I will cover this in a moment, so we'll leave this question for later. Okay, this is an interesting one. Was daisy chaining of visual observers discussed? I don't know if it is applied for this, and I have heard this is available for large volume jobs. I have been in consideration for and excited for implementing. Okay, so thank you for that question. So the visual observer waiver, what is actually waiving is the fact that you can use more than one visual observer. So the requirement is that they have to cover 2 static miles around the site, and you can, I mean, any of them could lose sight at any point as needed, and the other one covering or achieving the task. So essentially, what you're having is more than one visual observer, and certainly you can use daisy chaining, not to extend too much, but at least to cover the base requirement of two status miles. So this is important to keep in mind that you can have more than one visual observer. Okay. If you want to do a shielded operation and need to briefly pass over a public road, would that cause the BVLOS application to be rejected? Well, clearly this is a question that for FAA, but based on the experience that we have gotten from customers flying, so in general, what you need to demonstrate is that your operation is safe, in this case with respect to the ground risk. So if you're crossing public road, then you're not assuring completely safety during flight. So yeah, that might be a reason for rejection. So you can substantiate like, okay, if I'm going to operate at certain hours, nobody is crossing the road, or I don't know, I'm able to close the road for a certain time. I mean, any kind of mitigation, you need to explain it. In principle, yes, that might be a reason for rejection, because especially if you haven't considered that in your safety assessment. If it is like, oh yeah, I'm crossing roads and I'm doing nothing, then yes, probably is a cause for rejection. So you need to show FAA that you have considered all the risk and that you have tackled and assessed them properly. Um, I'm looking for. Well, I don't know if you, Michael, want to comment on this one. I am looking at fisheries research. Do you have any examples of low-level BVLOS for this application?
Yeah, I haven't heard any examples of that one. I can answer some of the questions assigned to me right now. Let's take a look. We'll start. So one of the questions was, is there any third-party software that currently uses DJI Dock, or is it only Flight Hub 2? Yeah, there is a few. An example is Flightbase. I'll go ahead and I'll show you guys. I'll pull up, see if I can share my screen. So you guys can see this is our DJI Enterprise, our ecosystem solution catalog. If you go down here, you guys can see cloud platform, autonomy dock platform. So these are some of the different softwares that we partner with that are not Flight Hub 2 that if you wanted to use to fly your dock, such as Flightbase, Drone Deploy, Drone Harmony, Highlander. So there's quite a bit of a few options. Go to the next question. Does the visual observer still need to follow the guidelines of watching with the naked eye versus magnified tools such as binoculars? Yeah, that is correct. The VO would still need to follow the guidelines, as the FAA generally still expects VOs to maintain unaided visual line of sight of the drone. Good question. Let's see. For the ADS-B in air sense monitoring, what drones are capable of this? Is there an extra price? Can you talk more about how this works? Yeah, this is a free feature. Our DJI Enterprise drones have this feature. This is not just on Flight Hub 2, as I'm sure some of you guys have flown manually using Pilot 2. You'll see that the ADS-B is still coming in. You're able to see on your map, and you'll get all sorts of warnings. Even your telemetry might turn yellow, and it'll say aircraft nearby. So this is a free feature on Pilot 2 and Flight Hub 2 and our DJI Enterprise drones. Go to the next question. What is the maximum distance that you can fly with the DJI Dock 2 under your current waivers? So this is a good question. It's a little bit tricky also. Each waiver is kind of different. Depending on what you get approved for from the FAA, you might get different altitudes, different distances. So there really isn't, I guess, a definitive answer on how far you can fly with the DJI Dock 2 under any waiver. Maybe Javier, do you know more? You can go into detail about this question.
Sorry, Michael, I was reviewing some other questions. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, under the current waivers and the templates that we have right now, what is like the maximum distance you can fly with the DJI Dock to?
There's no specific restriction for that, as long as we comply with what is defined in the technical specifications of the system.
Okay, let me take a look at some other questions. A big question, will this be recorded and distributed? Yes, it will be. You'll be receiving an email, I believe a few hours after the webinar is completed.
Okay, I have another question here. Your waiver is generally listed for a specific location, so we would need additional waivers for different dock locations. So no, as we mentioned during the webinar, this is nationwide what we have obtained. So meaning that as long as you're complying with the same conditions of your operation in terms of a risk, run risk, all what we have listed, then you can, this is not attached for one specific location, but any location in the US that complies with those conditions. Thank you for that question. That was a way of reviewing the concepts.
One question I see right here is, so based on the Dock 2 specs, what is the maximum distance? The maximum distance is 10 kilometers, but there's ideal versus real world. I've had some experiences where if you're in a congested area, there's a lot of trees, buildings, you're not going to see that full range. So there's a lot of factors into that also. A good question right here. I see, can the Dock 2 be placed on a vehicle, fire truck, or boat? No, because of basically where the dock needs to land. It needs to get really accurate GPS, and if it's on a constantly moving platform such as a fire truck or boat, it's not able to do its mission. So no, the dock cannot be placed on a fire truck or boat. I guess they could if they weren't being moved, but I believe the idea of what you're trying to accomplish would probably most likely move the dock. So yes and no, I guess, if it could be placed on a fire truck if the fire truck is not being moved, or boat.
More general comment, there are several questions from other jurisdictions, mainly in Europe and Latin America. We are marking these questions as answered just because the content, the goal of this webinar was US, but certainly you can expect more material coming, and please have the look on the bonus resources, especially for the European part. Okay, so do you have any other questions, Michael? Otherwise, I can go through the ones that we got from, before the webinar. Okay, we answered this one. Yeah, I think we cover, well, we're continue getting some. Okay, I will go through some of the previews so that we can cover them. So, what training does a drone pilot need for BVLOS operations? Good question. The remote piloting command, which you still need one, obviously, for this kind of operations, is seated in the control station using Flight Hub 2 has to be a Part 107 certificate pilot. Are there applications that we know have been accepted? The answer is yes. So we applied for this waivers, we got acceptance directly from FAA, then we shared these templates to customers, and customers have been already applying using these very templates that you saw, and they got acceptance already. Will the FAA issue BVLOS waivers per mission or per site or on a company-wide basis or per 107 certificate holder? So this is not per certificate holder. This is the operator who applies. So when you go to FAA drone zone, there's a responsible person for the operation for the certificate of waiver, and you will add also a pilot, and doesn't need to be the only pilot. But this is for the applicant. So the applicant is the operator. So it's not a waiver per mission. It's a waiver per operator, although is according to the mission to the operation that you have described. So that's the caveat. It's not per flight, in other words, is according to what you do for this applicant, for what this applicant has declared. Next question, how can small and medium-sized law enforcement agencies obtain BVLOS waiver if they are not doing DFR? So here I will try to collect, because we got several questions related with DFR and public safety. We'll try to, for the sake of time, try to combine all of them. So essentially what we have described in this webinar is part 1 of waivers. There is another path, which is under part 91, and that's essentially for public aircraft. Not necessarily all public safety agencies can apply or have the resources or have the part 91 background or authorizations. So what Michael was mentioning, like COAs, like certificate of authorizations. So this is another path, part 91. Very recently, FAA has released some part 107 BVLOS shielding operations waiver for public safety, but we haven't touched that one because that has several restrictions for the moment, and drone in a box solution is not part of that. So that doesn't mean that is not for being considered. You certainly, if you're a public safety agency and you do not have Part 91 applicability, then you can certainly consider these kind of Part 107, those shield waivers for public safety. Nevertheless, that one has a restriction or some certain distance from the pilot to the drone, so that makes not really a fit for drone in a box solutions. So still, you can use this, what we described here, because this is a typical Part 107 waiver application. So public safety agencies or not, they can use it under Part 107. So all this stands what we presented today. Just to give, it's just for your awareness that you might hear of another new path that was recently released by FAA, but is not directly applicable to docks. I hope that kind of cover several of the questions related with safety. Let's continue. What states do you currently have BVLOS waivers in place? So as we mentioned, this is not related to one state, it's nationwide. Question, how far in advance of BVLOS operations should I apply for a waiver? That's a good question. So first of all, you don't need to have DJI Dock with you to start all this process. As we mentioned, this typically takes 90 days, up to 90 days for the FAA to respond. But you don't need the actual physical Dock with you to start the process. You have all the materials, you have the user manuals, you know what operation you're going to do, so you can start applying and start that process. So, to back to the question, how long should I my operation? Well, as much in advance as possible is the better. I mean, because you can have the permit and not having the equipment yet, that's fine. That's completely okay. So the sooner the better, essentially. Keeping in mind the turnaround of 90 days. Right? Next question, how to remove geofence, geolocks once the waiver is obtained. So geofencing or unlocks is completely a parallel thing to the waiver issue. So anything, any area that you need to unlock or whatever in the traditional way, that continue to stand a part of the issuance of the waiver. It's completely in parallel. Next question: will this be a permanent waiver? Will we be able to be lost waiver or file one for every flight? Well, I hope this one is by this moment more or less clear. Is not a permanent waiver. It's not forever and ever. Uh, it, when you submit, you will request a period of validity, and FAA will evaluate and approve. Take up to 3 years, but could be some months or weeks, whatever you request. But it's not permanent. And we will see what happens when the final rule in 2 years is effective. Probably this will still be in place and grandfather permission. We will see what happens, but for the moment is according to the period that the FAA approves according to your request. And I think that's all the questions I have. Do we have any new questions? Okay, we still have some minutes. We can review if there's something else. Michael, do you have any other question to go from?
I've answered either most of them offline, sent them in, but we're not getting any further questions that I see right now.
Just as you talk about that.
See a pretty common one, cost of Dock 2. It's going to be around $10,000.
There's one question, Michael. Don't know if you want to mention something. Have you seen DJI Dock 2 deployed in areas where an off-grid solution has been implemented? For instance, solar panels, batteries, etc.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess it depends on what your definition of off-grid solution is. I've not seen it being powered from just batteries or solar panels, but I have, I think the use case I was telling you guys about was the solar panel field. There was outlets out there. I'm not sure if they are powered from the solar panel. They most likely probably are, but typically in a solar field, there's solar panels and there's going to be outlets. That outlet was used to provide power to the Starlink for the internet and power for the dock. So I guess it really depends on how off grid, but I haven't seen like I know I answered a question earlier, I think offline. It says a power bank can actually power the DJI Dock too, but I've never seen like a customer or use case where they're constantly just using like a really big power bank or battery to power the DJI Dock 2. for at least long terms. You can use a power bank. I've set up a power bank to power the dock to for maybe a few hours of operation, but nothing where weeks, months, years long.
Interesting questions that are somehow related with previous responses on in terms of other jurisdictions, distance, cost. Yeah, I think we have covered essentially most of the topics. Okay, I think that's all from my side, Michael. Any final words or something?
No, just I guess if we want to pull up let me pull up the QR code for let's see. Yeah. If they want to scan this QR code, fill out a survey, and also receive any DJI Dock 2 and Beyond Visual Line of Sight waiver materials and templates to get you started on the Beyond Visual Line of Sight application. I think a big thing today is to take away not only how to do it and everything about the Beyond Visual Line of Sight, but also you can apply for the waiver before you have the dock. So you can get approval from the FAA prior to receiving your DJI Dock 2. So that helps speed up the process. So today you can submit your waiver.
Okay, thank you so much. We hope that this webinar was informative for everyone. Feel free to browse these materials and reach out for any question. Thank you very much.